Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope all of you can hear and see uh, the screen I'm sharing now. So, in between, we missed one class due to the holiday, but again, uh, good thing is that we are on track since. For your information, just I'd like to tell you one thing that in the slide that I'm showing here, I am basically covering the first module as well as the second module. So if you look at the syllabus, you will see that in the second module, there are subheadings like, just a moment, let me share here. Ah, so the first module includes our concepts and definitions on disaster, hazard, vulnerability, risk, severity, frequency, and those kind of things. Also here capacity, prevention, mitigation, and risk. And then in the second module, the disastrous classification. So disastrous classification in terms of the origin of the disaster as well as different kinds of man-made disasters, industrial disasters, and then non-industrial disasters. So this kind of thing actually we have discussed. So parallelly we are going on with module 2 and module 1. Then module 3, there is a small module which probably hopefully you can start by tomorrow. Okay, so but before that, there is one part that's one is known as the vulnerability profile of India. So I will spend some time explaining this one maybe tomorrow, and then we can go to directly to module 3. So module 3 includes disaster impacts, different impacts of the disasters, and then you can see in module 3, and then there is a very important chapter that would be in module 4. So I hope I can finish this module 4 and then up to module 5 uh, by July, mid of July, where that's when your probably the exams will start. Okay, so let us start with the presentation. So in the last class, we had a discussion on vulnerability. So vulnerability, in the shortest terms, is nothing but it is the degree of loss, okay, or the degree of, you can say, probable loss. So vulnerability depends on many factors, and then vulnerability also it has different classifications. We discussed initially what is known by the physical vulnerability with different examples. We gave an example of two different kinds of buildings, or when these buildings are constructed out of different materials, but even when the buildings are exposed to the same intensity of floods in terms of suppose the water level, or in terms of suppose the velocity of the floods, uh, by virtue of these two buildings being constructed out of different materials, they will experience a different sort of different degree of damage. And then we can say that the vulnerability of the buildings are different. Why? Because it is by virtue of the construction materials or the physical property of the buildings themselves. So that is when we say that this is the physical vulnerability. Okay, so physical vulnerability may equally be relevant for many other disasters. We can say different hazards such as uh, earthquakes, or even it can be due to landslides, and then whatever disasters or hazards you can imagine. It's true as well as for tsunamis, or even soil erosion, or even beach line erosion, or even riverbank erosion, whatever you can think of. So first, I would like you to tell that the discussions that we go on here, you try to relate those discussions with the surroundings that you often come across, you see. Okay? In that process, you will question yourself as well as questions learning whatever you do in the class. That would be a process that will refine your thought process and then will help you to understand the subject in a more clear way. Okay, so physical vulnerability also is uh, it can be by the remoteness of settlement, as we have said, the site, the design materials, those kind of things. Okay, so I just gave an example of the material, uh, the design of the material, but how can you get an example of physical vulnerability of a building by the remoteness of settlement or the critical infrastructure? This kind of things. Just question yourself and then try to find examples in your surroundings. Then coming back again to the second category of vulnerability, this is also very important. This is often we have to look into the social science sphere, where you see that the vulnerability is also governed by different aspects of the society or the norms. Okay, so this is also includes uh, social acceptances, cultural values, or your basic human rights, system of governance. So then again, equity, then values, customs, and beliefs, and then and an overall collective organizational system. That again, this whole definition, I'm pulling it from UNI's US definition. So let us try to simplify it and then explore the meaning of most of the words which are reflected here. Okay, so as you see, again, vulnerability is the degree of loss, but social vulnerability, when we say, is a little bit different from the physical vulnerability in the sense that it is due to the characteristics inherent of social interactions. So, as you know, that we all are human beings, and then we are a social animal. Okay, so our relationship with uh, another human being, or as a family, or as a society, it is governed by many of these rules, regulations, or the norms that are exhibited in the society where we live. And for example, uh, if you are living in a society which is actually close to the coastal areas, probably then you have a habit of exploring the sea in a more meaningful way uh, by virtue of exploring the livelihoods itself. So the fishermen, they have a different degree of vulnerability from someone who is actually settled in the hills or the mountains uh, by virtue that they are near to the sea and then they have to depend on the sea more for their livelihoods than someone who is far away from the sea. Okay. Uh, then again, if you look at the cultural values also, these are also of high importance. So just I would like to cite an example. Mm, did you remember the big Indian Ocean tsunami which came in 2004? How many of you actually are aware of it? Yes? Is there anyone who is aware of the big Indian Ocean tsunami that came in 26th of December in 2004?
Yeah, yeah, I also have heard
Okay.
in shown in the book, but don't know exact, you know,
Okay.
in
Okay.
magazine also, you know, I listen.
Okay. Good. Good. Uh, that is very important that you keep your eyes and ears open. Uh, Not only doesn't mean that because you were uh, engineers or you are going to be civil engineers, you can escape from other aspects of the happenings that is going on. Uh, but the more you keep your eyes and ears open, you would create yourself to be a better human being or someone who can actually contribute more to the society. So it is good that you are all aware about the happenings around you. Okay, so one of the examples is that in 2004, uh, in December 26th, there was a big tsunami that was originated in near in Sumatra, in Indonesia, and then there was a reserve called slip in the ocean bed. Okay, initially it was triggered by that rupture in the fault, which is below the Indian Ocean, near Sumatra in Indonesia. And then, uh, as you know, like the origin of all the tsunamis, then it immediately triggered huge waves which started coming towards the shorelines. And then most shorelines are the countries uh, in the Indian Ocean. So it first hit Indonesia very bad, then it came to Thailand, and then it came to uh, even Myanmar, and then hit the coastal belt of the Indian subcontinent. And then when I was saying about the coastal areas of Indian subcontinent, uh, the belt that faces the 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 origin of the tsunami. That means Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and then uh, parts of Kerala. Those are the areas where uh, directly hit by the waves. And then when I was talking about vulnerability or social vulnerability, which can arise due to the cultural barriers, because I would like to give you an example. So once the tsunami was over, and then people went to the beach, and then there were an assessment of damage which was going on. It came to notice that among the casualties, or among the people who were killed uh, because of the tsunami, it was seen that many of the uh, people were, or mostly, major part of the people were mostly the women. So, can you give an explanation why that happened? Why do you think in Tamil Nadu or in Andhra Pradesh, a major chunk of the population that were killed were women? So, why do you think this makes some sense when we're talking about vulnerability? Yes? Any idea? And then try to
Don't know,
relate.
sir.
Okay, you think and try to relate women to some cultural values which actually made them more vulnerable to that kind of a situation. So if you think deep, then you will find that what these women were wearing at the time when the tsunami struck. Normally, if you look in South India or in many parts of India, what is the more traditional dress the women wear? Okay, am not talking about the northeast part of the country, but mostly to the southern part. They wear different kinds of saris, right? Understood? Yes or no? Hello.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Yes, sir. Got it.
So imagine someone wearing a sari and then you have to run from the waves. So it is really difficult. You cannot run very fast or very effectively if you are wearing sari. And then during the time when the disaster struck. So that was precisely the reason that many people who were killed during the time when the disaster struck. After analysis, it showed that those were women folks. And then it was due to the fact that they were wearing saris. And why they were wearing saris? Because it is part of the culture itself that saris are the traditional dress women prefer to wear. So by being adhering to the cultural norms or the cultural values of wearing a traditional dress, they became more vulnerable during the time when the tsunami came. So I can give you another example. These are further examples that will clarify the relations between these cultural norms and someone being more vulnerable during the time of disaster. Recently, there was an article which was published, and then it was from the high Himalayan villages in many parts of Nepal, and then it was seen that in those villages in Nepal there was an exceptional high rate of lung cancer or lung disease in the women. Again, okay, so this cause was investigated, and then later on it was found that those are the villages where mostly the women spend most time in the kitchen, and then they are exposed to the smoke, which is a part of the fuel or the part of the uh, how to say part of the fuel with which they normally cook the meal, and then it is either taken from the forest or it is from the other sources. So in a confined environment, houses are smaller, the roofs are made out of slate, and then there is no adequate uh, air ventilation. So if you are spending most of the time in an environment like that, then these smokes eventually will be turning into carbon monoxide and then gases which are detrimental to your natural health. And then that is precisely the reason that these women were showing higher levels of prevalence of lung cancer. So again, if you truly try to investigate the root cause, it is surely by the belief, the cultural norms of the system and the institution and the society therein that make the woman to do the household work there. And then by being part of the culture, they become more vulnerable. So this is in the normal situation itself. We are not talking about a time when there is a hazard or there is a disaster, but you see, this is a normal situation. And then the situations turn out to be even more detrimental or difficult when there is disaster or hazard. So in this form, you can also think in your surroundings. Is there someone or somebody who is more vulnerable because he or she is sticking on or clinging on to the age-old cultural values or the norms? Okay? Some of these are inherent of the social interactions. I am not asking you to look into those as in good or in bad terms, but I'm trying to look into or explore those relationships It is not that you are going to judge, but you have an open mind and you become an explorer. That is how you conduct a research. Later on, when you will be even more matured and then you will progress into higher semesters or even after you get a degree, if you want to really continue your work in terms of research and investigation, this is precisely the kind of mindset that you have to develop. First of all, you'll have to find a problem in society. See, ultimately, either you become civil engineer or you become mechanical engineers, or even if you're a non-engineer or you just pursue any degree or any course, the ultimate goal is to serve the society, is it? And in order to serve the society as a civil engineer, you have to first find the problem. I'm not talking about precisely a problem that is related to uh, building construction or road construction. But since the greater purview of the subject that I'm teaching now, it is a multidisciplinary subject, then these problems are also a part of your bigger prospect of investigation. So, first of all, you have to keep an open window or open mindset to investigate the problems. So, do not judge immediately. I'm not asking you to find a conclusion that this is good or this is bad, but try to find the problem itself first and then the different factors which are interlinked and then it is contributing to the problem. So on your part, a research or a researcher, your job will be to contribute a little bit that is possible within the scope of that period uh, to uplift the sufferings of the society or the people. Okay, however small, but that should be the ultimate goal. Maybe in disaster management, it may be in civil engineering, or it may be in any other forms of engineering, or any other domain of science or arts, or whatever you say. Okay, so let us read this complete sentence. And it says social vulnerability refers to the inability of people. So that means it is the inability of an individual. Then it says organizations. Then it explores it in a bigger context. So in between we have a family, people, family or organizations, societies. Then again it is even a bigger context to withstand adverse impacts to hazards due to characteristics inherent in social interactions, institutions, and systems of cultural values. So these few of the examples that we have already discussed. It is linked to the level of well-being of individuals. Okay, so now it says there are some preconditions. There are some preconditions which will determine what is the level of social vulnerability. So one of them will be uh, your your well-being. So this well-being will translate into your well-being, the physical well-being, as well as your mental well-being or the emotional well-being. All these things will matter at the individual level, again at the community level, and at the societal level. So if you were exploring the news now, you may be well aware that there is a confrontation or war that is going on between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So if you look deeply from a Palestinian perspective, then you will see that the communities and the societies, the individuals who are living inside those war zones, in parts in West Bank or in Gaza Strip, think what may be the well-being of these individuals, emotional well-being, their physical well-being, their mental well-being. So these are already suppressed. Even now, in those areas, children as young as 5 years or 6 years, 7 years, they cannot even sleep during the night. Even if they want to sleep, they do not sleep. Why? They are fearful of falling asleep. So that is, their well-being is already suppressed. So if you are in a society like that, or somebody is living in a society like that already, which is undergoing a suppressed immunity or suppressed level of well-being, then automatically you are vulnerable. Okay? So it also includes aspects related to levels of literacy and education. So how literacy and education can contribute to social vulnerability. So you see, in the exam, there may be questions like this also. Uh, do you think now it's your part of the job to investigate some sort of relationship between levels of literacy and education, and then you become vulnerable, or the community becoming vulnerable, or a family becoming vulnerable? Now, during the time, so for that example, let us discuss one more example. So during the pandemic, you see now from everywhere, people are trying to educate an entire generation, an entire race about how you can escape this disease, how you should maintain yourself in a group. So this is our level of awareness, or our level of, I can say, general education that everyone or the educated is trying to uplift. So, what are the messages that we are getting? Messages are that we should maintain a distance of safe distance, maybe 6 feet or maybe 7 feet, whatever that means. We should not we should not be together. We used to during just 1 or 2 years ago. It is very difficult because up until 2 years ago, we actually were involuntarily, as a social animal, we were coming together. Whenever we had to go to the market, we had to go to the schools or colleges, or even within our family, we met many friends and people. And nobody really bothered to keep a distance of 6 feet. But it is a time that we have to stick to this level of education or awareness. And then imagine we have to educate entire population, a global population. This is very challenging job. So among these uh, different messages, so if a society or an individual who has this awareness that he or she has to keep a distance of 6 feet, then his level of vulnerability is automatically a little bit less than the one who do not have this awareness or education. So if you just keep on mingling with people like we used to have before, then we are throwing ourselves at a greater level of exposure, or we are becoming more vulnerable. So by being, you are educated or not, or if you are aware or not, you become more vulnerable or you become less vulnerable. So there is a slight difference between these words like literacy, education, and awareness. So the proper connotation now should be awareness rather than literacy or education. It doesn't have to really be literate to understand the fact that you have to keep a distance of about 6 feet now. But there are examples, plenty of examples you can also investigate by yourself, but how literacy can be associated with your level of vulnerability, how education is associated with your level of vulnerability. Okay, so awareness right now is the key word. Then again, related to levels of literacy and education, the existence of peace and security. So peace and security is also very important. As I said before, peace and security again is a bedrock for your well-being, your well-being, physical, mental, emotional well-being. And then if you do not have proper peace and security, just take an example over a neighboring country in Myanmar, what is happening? Myanmar is, even in this state, the whole country is at a state of shakiness from within. So that is not proper peace and proper security. These individuals or the societies that are exposed to right now in that particular country. I hope you are also aware about the developments in Myanmar because in February 1, their government was, what happened? Toppled by the military government, saying that the election that happened uh, preceding the February 1 in November was flawed. And then unanimously the military took the decision to overthrow the government, which was elected civilian government, and then they took the reign of power to their own hands. Then since then, every day, even during the pandemic, people are killed on the streets, people have been taken from their houses, nobody knows where they have been taken to, and then ultimately the death counts are multiplying every day. So you see that without proper peace and security, your level of vulnerability also is suppressed. Then, access to basic human rights. So, what are the human rights? One of your rights is the right to freedom of speech, right to education, right to basic healthcare services. Okay? So, if you are not uh, getting access to these fundamental rights or human rights, say, then you feel that you are already suppressed level and then your vulnerability is actually a little bit higher compared to someone who is enjoying these rights. So in a country now or in a system or if in a governance where you cannot really criticize someone, where you cannot talk freely about the system itself, or even if you cannot uh, have access to the hospitals, if you do not have access to proper schools, then you will feel that you as an individual, you as a family, you have less, you have more vulnerable to to face an impending threat or hazard or a disaster, such kind of a thing. So again, what do you mean by system of good governance? Okay, uh, suppose nowadays what is happening now, uh, people are getting sick due to the disease or pandemic, and then immediately they are trying to save their loved ones or family members by calling on to a hospital or trying to go for an ambulance service. But now what is happening? Even if you are falling sick, you do not have enough hospital beds. Even if you somehow securing some hospital beds, you do not have proper oxygen cylinders. So this governance, you cannot say now this is we are we are in a good governance system. Forget about the pandemic. Even during the time when there were no pandemic, suppose you are in a very remote place, then you suddenly feel sick in the middle of the night. There may be instances where it is quite normal. People fall sick in the middle of the night. Then, if you take that particular patient to a hospital at night, and then, okay, the hospital is a place, the physical building is there, but there are no doctors, there are no nurses, there are no attendants who can actually take care of the response. Then it is an example of a very bad governance. So you don't have to go very far. We have plenty of examples like this where the governance is not good, and by virtue of that, even if you go to these institutions or social institutions, I'd say, you do not get the service which is being desired, which is your basic human right. This is surely by a lack of governance. So if you investigate why the doctor is not there at the middle of the night, even if you were very sick, or even during the daytime, or even if you go to any government office, if you have to stand in the queue for hours and hours and hours and do not get the service, that is an example of a very bad governance. Okay, so these are plenty of examples, and you can see, and then you feel that you are actually more vulnerable in the context of, or in order to face a natural disaster, or even there may be no natural disaster. In developed countries, within 1 hour, you can do so many things, but in a country which is not developed, you have to spend hours and hours and hours and hours just to get your thing done. So you don't have to really, I cannot give you many examples. You can get these examples for yourself. Okay, social equity, positive traditional values, customs, and ideological beliefs. So these are all these examples which you can just with an open mind you can find plenty of examples like that. Positive traditional values. So okay, so our values, just if I like to say that during or when we are all here in the northeastern part of India, then we are situated. We live in the valley, which is frequently visited by floods in the river. So our values or our traditional values, which is one of the positive values, uh, was that we construct pole houses. Okay, pole houses, or the houses where uh, it is an elevated platform, and then you live there. So why do you construct these kind of houses? This is an example of a positive traditional value, because when there is a flood water, the water will come and then it will rise. And then if you are living in an elevated house or a full house, and then if you keep a boat, you can be less vulnerable during the time when there is flood water hitting your house. But imagine if you were constructing a non-pole house, a non-elevated platform house, and then you were constructing a very beautiful house, but you are not conforming to your traditional norms, which is often the practice nowadays, then the floodwaters will come. It will destroy everything that is in the ground floor or the first floor, whatever you want to say. And then ultimately, you your degree of loss will be higher if you had constructed a pole house there. But for some reason, but beyond our comprehension, it's a very different, it's a complex societal phenomenon. We try to stick not on to the traditional houses in this part of the country. We prefer nowadays more of RCC house, which is a non-pole house. So during the time of the floods, or even during the urban flooding, people are experiencing a greater level of damage. Their their vulnerability is rising. You don't have to go too far within the city in Guwahati itself. There are places such as Nobin Nagar, and there are places like Anil Nagar. And then just within one instance of rainfall, people cannot really stay in their first floor rooms because all this water immediately they are congesting those first floors or ground floors, and then they are now it is becoming up to such an extent that if you know that someone is living in these two mentioned places that I have just mentioned, uh, people are fearful of marrying their daughters to those places. So this is the extent of the threat. So in Anil Nagar, in Navin Nagar, it's like all the time. These are houses are flooded, and people have. If you go to those areas, you will see that many of these houses they have abandoned to live in those ground floors or first floor? Because one of the reasons is that we know this is a floodplain, we know this is a uh, urban flooding area, but even then we are not conforming to our traditional values of construction of a house. That means if those houses were constructed in elevated platforms or whole houses, people would not have seen or faced this kind of tragedy as they are facing it right now. Okay. Another example of a positive traditional value is uh, uh, the habit of staying in the hills. With due respect, I would like to say that many of the many of these small tribes or the people from Northeast India, they know how to live in the hills. If you don't, if you go to some areas in Meghalaya, you will see that their houses are constructed so beautifully that blends with the natural slope of the mountains or the hills. But the moment you travel down through this valley in Assam, you see this natural slopes are being cut abruptly, and then high up in the mountain or in the hills, people are constructing multi-story buildings. So this is not an example of a positive traditional values whenever you are sticking on to construction habits, particularly looking into the aspect that it is a high vulnerable zone in terms of earthquakes. And then the moment you cut the slope abruptly, you are asking for more disasters, landslides. Okay? Okay, so I think we have to end this meeting. How it says that meeting will end maybe in 5 minutes. And let me see the time. Yes, so near about in 4 minutes, we will be ending this thing. So I'm spending a little more time in explaining these basic things for you. You may have a question that why am I just talking the same thing over and over again? Because these are the fundamental things. So if you have a good grasp about these terminologies, then you have a good understanding about the interconnect connections between a hazard, between a disaster, between vulnerability. What is a social vulnerability? What is a physical vulnerability? What is economic vulnerability? Then, with these sort of understandings and tools, you can explore your surroundings, or you will be exploring your surroundings in a more efficient way. That is the idea of imparting knowledge into you through this course. Okay? And other things are even not very difficult. These are some of the facts which even if you read in this open book also you will be learning. But anyway, we'll be discussing those things as well during the course of this lectures. Okay, so before we end, do you want to ask me something? Any questions? Okay, no question.
Sir, little bit explain about social equity.
Equity. Okay. So
Yeah.
equity and equality, these two are sociological terms, but there is a slight difference. So how about I leave it to you today? So I give you a hint. You study, and then tomorrow when we meet again, we will start with this thing. What is the difference between equity and equality? Okay, and why social equity is important in your construction of vulnerability as an individual or as a social animal? Okay, that is a good question you are raising. Raising. Uh, Even if I try now, we don't have time enough. So please focus on equity tonight. Okay, by the way, tomorrow the class is scheduled from 9 o'clock, right? But maybe I'll have to reschedule the timing. So if I just postpone it to uh, in the later hours, do you have some problems? Or maybe in around 4 to 5, are you available tomorrow? Tomorrow,
Yes, sir.
huh? Okay. because tomorrow I
Yes,
had
sir. Fine.
probably I'll have to go to university for some time, a short amount of time. Still not decided, maybe. So in that case, we will stick on to a different time schedule. Okay. Okay.
Sir,
Hmm.
we give our opinions on chat box. Is it fine?
No, 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 no. I will share you this what is it? Google form. There you fill it up. So participant, you see now 60.